Howdy.
How you doing, Ian?
Well, not bad for an old coot. How are you, Mike?
Well, there's an older coot who's going to join us in a minute.
Yeah, my elder statesman brother. Yeah.
It's funny because I know he's your older brother, but I didn't realize how close in age you are. Like it's close.
Yeah, our parents were masters of Planned Parenthood. Um, yeah, we're just almost 2 years apart.
Yeah, not much gap between, I guess, birth and then pregnancy number two there, I guess.
So yeah, but that allowed us the opportunity to we were best buddies when we were stuck on, visiting the families back in the UK, with something to do. We managed to escape some of the really fundamentalist church services on my mother's side of the family. Dad would give us some money to go out and play on the putting green.
Well,
Go on, boy. We all don't have to suffer through all of this.
well, that's why I'm so excited. I know we're waiting for Dave here, but I'm so excited to have you on together because like I've had a chance to chat with you each individually, and you're just legendary Canadian talents, and having you on together, I think we can learn a lot about your relationship with each other and how your professional lives will intersect now and then. It's fascinating.
Well, and they do intersect. I think I gave Dave one of his first writing jobs, and he gave me one of my first film scores.
All right,
So,
put a pin in that because Dave's arrived. He's I guess he's only a minute late. I can't really chastise him too hard here. Let's hear how he sounds.
Toronto Mike,
How you doing, Dave?
Ian Thomas.
David Thomas, we've got David Thomas with us today.
Have you two met?
What's that?
Have you two met? Ian meet Dave, Dave meet Ian.
Well, that's nice of you to facilitate that, Mike. Thank you.
Before you jumped on, Dave, well, first,
Yeah.
thanks for being here. But we were talking about how, yeah, I always think of you, Dave, as the older brother. But just today, I went to find out, birth years and dates, and it's just by like a hair. Like you're only older by a little bit.
Well, because the information on the internet is wrong.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, correct.
And I never bothered to correct it because it made me a year younger.
Okay.
It says my birth date is 1949. It isn't. It's 48.
Okay, that explains everything. Because it looks like your poor mom, who I want to actually chat about off the top, because my condolences. I know you lost your mother just like 18 months ago, but if you go by the Wikipedia birth dates, it looks like you were like 3 months old when Ian was on his way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that gives them something to talk about. I'm okay with that. And if I can appear to be a year younger at this age, well, I don't know. I think that's a good thing.
You look great. Are you dyeing your hair, Dave? Am I allowed to ask that personal question?
Yeah. I'd look like fucking Methuselah if I didn't dye my hair.
You mean like your brother Ian?
Yes. Older, in fact.
Well, you at least got hair to dye. I would probably do that if I had some, but it just hurts my skin.
Ian, I'm so determined. I would paint on my bald head if I had no hair.
Well, there's the guy that he made a lot of money with that paint to fill in your bald spots. Ron, what's his name? Remember that? And he'd have an audience go and look at this bald spot, and then he'd
Popeil, Ron Popeil.
Right, and the audience would burst into spontaneous applause.
He also came up with the pocket fisherman and a couple of other little useless gadgets.
What was his last name again?
Popeil.
Popeil. Yeah, there you go. So that
He,
was
he was like a K-Tel guy.
yeah. And I just love that spray painting the top of your head was his answer to baldness.
I don't remember that specifically, but I know he started out with kitchen stuff,
Yeah.
like the Miracle Shredder or things like that, that dicer and slicer, things to help in the kitchen. And then he expanded his product line.
Well, one of the ones he had was it was a spray paint. So if you had a balding spot on your head, he would spray over it, fluff the hair up, and then the audience would burst into
Spontaneous applause.
Yes. I love that crap.
Already loving this banter. So, Dave, thank you for being here. Thanks for doing this. This is a thrill for me to have you on at the same time.
Mike, a question.
Yeah, anything.
I was scrolling through your site and I saw pictures of all your guests, but they're in front of this tree that has kind of a Y branching. You got to do more with this tree. This tree has to become a celebrity in Toronto Mike's world.
So, okay, glad you brought up the tree. So, where do we find you today, Dave?
LA. I'm in a suburb of Los Angeles.
Okay,
because
so
nobody wants to live downtown.
Right. Okay, so you're in LA, and Ian, where do we find you today?
I'm in Dundas, Ontario.
Okay, so you got the freezing cold that I have here.
I do.
The Arctic blast, is that what they're calling it?
Yeah.
Like an idiot, though, I just went for like on the water. I live on the waterfront trail, and I went along Lake Ontario. And no joke, I was about 15 kilometers into this ride. My wiener froze. Okay, this literally happened. Like my wiener froze, and I'm like, I have to like get myself indoors, or I could risk losing this very important member.
Wow.
I'll tell you, that happens in the frozen north a lot. When people come back from that long walk in the snow, wienerless.
Oh, I got to get back to the tree. Okay, so because you two are geographically, distant from my South Etobicoke studio here, like I've been letting you guys zoom in. You're zooming in right now. But most guests, I'll be honest, I make them, I just talked to Ralph Benmergui this week, and he's like, he wants to come back. And I'm like, Benmergui, I'm not going to Zoom with you again. If you want to come back, you're going to be in the basement here. And he's agreed to come visit again from Hamilton. But the tree is my tree in the front yard, and every guest gets a photo by the tree if you're here in person, which you guys are not. And I kind of like the fact it's just like it's a regular tree. Like there's 1 week a year where this tree is beautiful because it blossoms, and it's exactly 1 week, and it's only once a year. But otherwise, it's just kind of like a regular tree. I think that's part of the charm. But you think I should do something more exciting with this tree?
Yeah, you should name it. Really, I mean, it's a star on your site.
Right.
Stars need names.
Okay, well, you're the creative. You were the madman, the marketing, advertising genius. Why don't you name my tree, and then that'll be the name.
Why don't we call it Toronto Tree, since you're Toronto Mike?
That is creative, right, Ian? He is the brains of the
I would give it kind of a religious origin.
Oh,
It was exactly like the tree that was in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's a kind of a nice obscure biblical
spoken like a true Bible belter.
I was just reading an article this morning on the right nationalist evangelical wing in the United States, believing that Donald Trump was sent to them by God. And
well, that guy who's the new head of the new head in the House of Representatives claimed that he was on a mission from God. God is making really bad choices these days, I'll tell you. he needs a stern talking to.
well, I always loved the idea that they made God a man. So it's like, wait a second. So God has a penis and balls. How small does your God have to be before he can wrap your tiny cranium around it? It's just this whole line of thought just.
Well, let's start here because Dave, before you got here, I was having a little chat with Ian about that age difference, but which I've now like my mind is blowing that's like a fake age on Wikipedia. You're actually a year older, which makes a lot of sense. But Ian was telling me your late mother came from a religious background. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
So what was what was your upbringing like with this religious aspect?
Well, I'll jump in. It was in transition because my dad was evolving. So he was a little bit ahead of my mother because he started reading, and reading will kill you every time when it comes to evangelical beliefs. So, but we grew up in a household that was, my mother was came from a family that was Plymouth Brethren, which is a real sort of like a Mennonite, like evangelical arm of the Christian church, and they're very literal and they're very religious, and they don't drive around in wagons like the Amish, but they don't do any. Sunday is a day of rest. They don't go to movies. They don't dance. They don't do any of those. They don't celebrate Halloween. You know what I mean? They don't do any of those classic evangelical religious no-nos. And my dad was a Baptist minister, and then he went on and did a degree in philosophy and started reading. And then the more he read, the more liberal he became, you know. So we were in a house that was kind of changing right from my earliest memories. It was in flux when I was 6, you know. So that would have made Ian 4, according to your new calculations of our age.
Ian is younger, but not blessed with the follicle greatness that you still have there, Dave. But Ian, what are your memories of growing up with this evangelical Mennonite like Christian sect?
Well, actually, the Mennonites are much more liberal than the Plymouth Brethren. Now, I know there's different branches of the Mennonite church, but by and large, I find the Mennonites a fairly liberal bunch. And actually, my son-in-law comes from a Mennonite background, and he's very, very liberal and I think very humanistic in his thought. I found in an early age that my grandparents on my mother's side were insanely judgmental, thereby kind of negating one of the prime directives of Christianity, judge not. And so the hypocrisy was pretty obvious to a 9-year-old.
They were also bad people. They were,
yeah,
you know,
very nasty, vindictive individual.
Well, yeah, and you know, greedy. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was a medical herbalist, and he got his. They're not allowed to drink, but he made this tonic wine that was like mostly alcohol, which he sold to the winos in Glasgow, and as a tonic drink, but it was alcohol, you know, and he had to stop when my grandmother found out. So there was this hypocrisy. There was this, you know, he was very wealthy and stingy. And he would say things like, when we went out for dinner, you can have anything you want from the left side of the menu. You know what I mean?
And then he would embarrass the hell out of us all by standing on a chair. Like, this is really grandstanding in a restaurant to deliver grace.
Yeah.
And
because he was short too. So that's what short people do sometimes to compensate. So but no, they were horrible people, Mike. And when your parents are good people and their parents are horrible people, you have a really interesting, you know, childhood, because you got a point of comparison right there. And it wasn't until later that we were able to actually, where my parents were open enough to talk to us and acknowledge that their parents were horrible, because my dad's parents, well, his mother anyway, were no gems either, you know. So it was kind of, this is part of my, people ask me sometimes, is comedy a talent? I don't think comedy is a talent. I think comedy is a disorder. And I think people who are funny for a reason. Ian's funny and I'm funny because we grew up in a pretty like fucked up environment. So that means you look for a place to show yourself. You look for a place that's truthful. You look for a place to ground the world that is confusing enough to a kid that you start to find jokes and making people laugh about things that are truthful, and that things like that can resonate. That's the beginning of developing your disorder into something that actually you can make money from later when you get older, you know?
You agree with that?
I there's elements of that I agree with. I also think that through the example of our father, who read everything, he was like a brilliant Greek scholar for starters. His old Greek professor told me at his funeral that he was the only student I ever gave a perfect mark of 100% to. It was like he was born in ancient Greek. So Dad was really, really bright, but he had this love of the absurd as well. And,
Oh yeah.
And the love of the absurd, we were able to observe that as kids. So
And connect with it.
And connect with it and realize that a good chunk of intellect is the realization of the insignificance of our species. And one of the problems I noticed in a lot of, actually, some of Dad's colleagues at Mac were pompous asses. And it's somehow that element had escaped them. Their education was kind of worn like some kind of upper class special club, and some of them were a real pompous lot. So
some were good. In fairness, some were good though. Some were
yeah.
good. I knew some of those guys.
So in John's in John's favor, I would say that was our father's name.
Right.
There was a really genuinely humble individual who had he had developed a set of values through everything he read, which his reading, I think, took him out of the mines of Wales and eventually into the universities of the world with his medical ethics books. And last 5 years of his life, he was a medical ethicist at McMaster. So he was sort of like the Epictetus model of what good was philosophy if it didn't have any benefit to society. So I think that came out of my father's Christian roots too, that his learning should have some kind of benefit to society. So we got to observe, I think, through his model, a couple of things. One, a real part of being smart is realizing how little we know. And what was it? Trying to judge an infinite universe by the inch.
Yardstick.
And what was that? It was a wonderful
I don't remember the specific quote.
On a measuring rod, by judging the infinite universe with this puny measuring rod that our science has given us. So I think that out of that, I think there was always humor in the family.
And we also had a really interesting kind of social upbringing, because the dinner guests, and my parents entertained a lot, would be intellectuals, sometimes famous scholars, and evangelical preachers, and really smart people and really kind of boneheaded people. Really interesting, but an interesting mix of people.
Sure.
Well, I just lost this. What was the name of the guy that we had over for dinner that Dad got into a thing with?
Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, Noam Chomsky was at our house for dinner.
Wow.
My dad got into a bit of a discussion with him, a bit of an argument with him, and nailed him. And
it was a funny one though. And Chomsky, Chomsky, Dad had, I guess, been responsible for getting him for the Wooden Lectures of McMaster University. And his talk that day was basically that there can be no conceptualization without vocabulary and grammar. And dad stopped and said, and yet in my 6-month-old granddaughter, I see conceptualization beginning in her face and her responses. And Chomsky said, well, of course, but I can't say that from the podium or it shoots my whole theory in the foot. So I loved the humility of that from Chomsky and the sense of camaraderie that Dad was responsible for getting the Russell archives to McMaster as well, Bertrand Russell stuff, and they became fast friends with Lady Russell, and it always amazed me how Dad seemed to have a lot of respect from people. He was respected, I think, as a human being as well as an intellect, which was just lovely to see growing up.
So I mentioned earlier, sadly, you lost your mom about 18 months ago or so. And before we maybe speak a little bit about your mother, Maureen, what was it like for you two when you lost your dad in the mid-90s, I guess 1996? I'm just wondering how that process for you two brothers compares to what you went through in May 2022 with your mother.
Well, I hadn't had the laughs that Dave gave me. I was totally blindsided by my father's death. And it took me a year and a half, 2 years to sort of get back to some kind of normal.
And he died at 70 of a heart attack, and he died really fast. I mean, I got on a red eye to be there, and he was gone before I got to Toronto. So it was probably the single most devastating thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And when my mother passed, by way of comparison, she had lived another 26 years or something past the point of my dad, and she deteriorated and was deteriorating in front of us. And so there is an aspect of passing when you're in your 90s that's kind of merciful. That's kind of like, oh, it was really sad. We were sad to lose her, but you know what? She wasn't really living a life anymore, and this is not good. So, whereas my dad was 70 years old and just dropped like a stone. So it was a much different type of death to deal with. And also because my dad was the first one to die, so that's another thing that, that I found difficult to deal with.
Yeah, it was early on. I do think, you become programmed to death. The more you experience it, the more you accept it as a part of life. That was really the first death we ever had to deal with of someone close. And I've lost quite a crop load of friends in the last 20 years. And so now death, sometimes I almost feel that I'm insincere in that I can't go down the depths of misery and morosity in other people's grief. And I realize in part that's because grief is a solo flight to begin with. You have to sort of figure it out for yourself, let your intellect argue with your soul and the animal that feels, loved cells untimely ripped. All of that struggle is a very personal struggle. I didn't know any of this at the time of my father's death, and he had always told me that. I asked him just a couple of months before he died what it was like when his dad died, because he was looking long in the tooth. And he said it was about having an education thrust upon him of learning to love in absence after the luxury of loving in presence. And that was just a little brilliant thing that helped me shovel out in the wake of his death. And you start learning that the problem is the love has nowhere to go, and that's what backs up and chokes you with grief. So-
It's an intensely personal thing too, though. I
Yeah,
mean, you know, C.S. Lewis was a real expert at giving people advice on how to deal with death until his girlfriend died. And then he just got so angry and bitter, and all the comfort that he'd been able to give to other people he couldn't give himself because it's personal. You know, everybody deals with it in their own way. And I remember Ian, we were sitting in the funeral home when my dad passed away, and it was an open casket. And I was just sitting there staring out. And Ian came over. Ian wanted to be more verbal, and he said to me, "What are you thinking? What are you just sitting there?" And I said to him, "Yeah, honestly, I'm not thinking anything. I mean, I'm just not thinking anything. There's nothing in my head right now. I'm just totally stunned. I'm just sitting here in the moment." And so, you know what I mean? It is intensely personal, and everybody deals with it in a different way. I remember reading a eulogy that Bob Hope did for Bing Crosby when Bing died. Bing fell off a stage, and he was on the job when he passed away. But Bob's eulogy was just so trite, filled with golf analogies like Bing always shot straight and true down the fairway of life, you know, and it was just like, oh, shut up. And I remember reading that and thinking, well, that's such a bunch of bullshit. Until I got older and a lot of my friends started to die, and I started to get used to hearing that somebody had died. And it affects you, but nowhere near the same way, you know. And I mean, I got a text from somebody about 5 days ago that a guy that I worked with on SCTV, Brian McConaughey, had passed.
Gonna
And I
ask you
just
about
talked to him 2 months ago. And I didn't. I was floored. But you know what? I didn't cry, and I didn't, you know, I moved on. And you do that. You just move on. And so that's my little sermon on death. If you want to hear more, you're going to have to go to my website.
I think or pay for my new book on death and dying.
it. Listen, shout out to Ridley Funeral Home. Okay.
Yes.
Is that Ripley or Ridley?
Ridley,
Oh,
founded by Arthur Ridley, but now the funeral director there is a guy named Brad Jones, and he's a sweetheart. You'd love Brad Jones.
It's interesting too, the deaths of friends and colleagues, and some of the colleagues, you know, you love for different reasons. You know, two recent colleagues I've lost in this last year was Shirley Eichhardt, who was just a wonderful Canadian singer-songwriter, and similar to me, you know, the covers of her material did better than her own versions, and so whenever we'd meet, there was just something. There was kind of an immediate sense of like souls, and so I was really deeply moved by her loss. Once, as David said, not to tears. I felt the world was something less without her presence. And then I had another friend recently that I toured with, and I just when he passed away, it didn't rock my boat at all because there had never been sort of a meeting of souls. It had been more just, you know, business colleagues, I guess you would say, show business colleagues. So that, you know, the variance of who is meaningful in their loss, and even now, you know, we as Ronnie Hawkins would say, you know, we're at an age now where we got one foot in the grave and the other in a bucket at WD-40, and there's some truth to that. So when you know some people are going slightly ahead of you, you know that your queue to the edge of the cliff is getting shorter and shorter. So, death at this point is not a profound thing, and
I have to let the dog out. Excuse me one
Yeah,
second.
go ahead.
it's part of where we all, uh, death has been made some sort of closet queen of our whole era, where you're not supposed to talk about it. And, I think death can be merciful, and death is obviously inevitable. And to not have open discourse about it is just really stupid and kind of escapist.
I agree. Now,
I have a metaphor for death, which is that we're all popcorn kernels in one of those big silver buckets at the movie theater. And then as you get older, the heat rises, and then you just start seeing them pop all around you, like pop, 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 pop. And your turn is coming, but you're just hanging in there hoping that you can squeeze a few more seconds out of this life.
it comes for us all. But Shirley Eckhart, she wrote Let's Give Them Something to Talk About for Bonnie Raitt, right? Bonnie Raitt covered her song. Yeah. So massive hit. I think a lot of people think that's a Bonnie Raitt song because she writes such beautiful music, but that's a Shirley Eckhart song.
Yeah. Well, she wrote Anne Murray covered her as well. And that was, we had something in common. Anne Murray did one of my songs as well. She had more than that cover. And of course, Bonnie was one of the first to comment on the loss of Shirley. She knew how talented Shirley was. And in some respects, that song handed Bonnie the biggest success that broke her through.
Right.
Through that echelon where you finally get to a point where a record company starts seriously marketing the product in record stores, which still existed in those days.
Yeah, I think she won the big Grammy that year, right? That was the big Grammy.
Yeah. It was a marvelous album all around. It helped expose a lot of people to how brilliant Bonnie Raitt was in the first place. But you needed that calling card that the record industry, that was the only vehicle the record industry had to market. They do not have marketing departments with anybody who has a degree in marketing. They get some guy who used to play bass in a band out in Regina who's now running marketing for Canada. And so it just, it's never ceased to amaze me how pathetic the major record companies, they call themselves companies, they're just hideous at marketing. They don't know how to marketing. The artist has to do all of it with the assistance of radio. And sometimes record companies would help you by greasing the palms of radio and finding a TV that fell off the back of a truck for a program director, that sort of thing. But yeah, God bless the success that Bonnie had and that Shirley gave her, and the repercussions of that were, of course, she surely got to live a more comfortable life out in Hockley Hills.
Yeah, sorry for your loss. Here's what I'm going to do at this point, because I have a big question, a Hamilton question I got to ask you guys. But first, I'm just going to let the listenership know that you've each been on Toronto Mike before. So if somebody wants to go back and hear, I don't know, the A to Z of Dave Thomas's career on Toronto Mike, that would be from April 2022. It was episode 1040. And here's the description I wrote at the time. I wrote, Mike is joined by SCTV's Dave Thomas as they discuss, they talk about SCTV working with comedy legends like John Candy, Eugene Levy, Rick Moranis, Bob and Doug McKenzie, of course, Strange Brew. We talked about Bob Hope because, as we heard, you do an amazing Bob Hope impression. Grace Under Fire, we talked about. That was quite something. Arrested Development, and so much more. Did you know, Dave, we talked for 2 hours and 18 minutes that day?
No.
Yeah, and it felt like nothing, but I felt like we could have done another 2 hours, but I thought I better give this guy a little breather here.
You long-winded old bastard. 2 hours.
It's amazing. Did you ever hear that episode? Go ahead. Sorry.
When it comes to talking about myself, Ian, I can go on and on, as you know.
Well, shortly thereafter, so October 2022. So I guess between the April 2022 appearance by you, Dave, and then the October 2022 appearance by you, Ian, you lose your mother in that span, right? This is when your mother passes away.
Yep.
Yeah. So in October 2022, Ian, you come on for episode 1135. And I wrote at the time, Mike chats with singer-songwriter Ian Thomas about his musical career. Tears are not enough. Quick question before I forget. Dave, why weren't you a part of the chorus for the Tears Are Not Enough charity single recording? Why were you not there?
They didn't ask me.
Okay.
You were in LA at the time too.
Okay, you were out of town.
That was done in Tirana.
But
Dad,
they still didn't ask me.
okay, because I just had Rick Emmett on the show, and that was one of my questions, because there's no Rick Emmett, and I'm like, Triumph was a big freaking deal. What's going on? And he was in Texas on tour or something, so he couldn't do it, but he did get asked to do it. But you know who did not get asked, real quick, because I just talked to Randy Bachman. Randy Bachman says he did not get asked, and it turns out there was a feud between Randy Bachman and Bruce Allen over the BTO left Bruce's company or something, and Bruce did not ask Randy Bachman to participate.
That's
Well, I
very
had no,
Bruce.
I had no feud with this guy, so I just like to know what the hell was up with him.
Yeah,
But he
that's
shunned me.
Sean Candy was there.
I know. Oh,
Yeah,
believe me, I know who was there.
And remember that the Bruce Allen argument. Bruce Allen, you remember, is the guy, of course, who said the music business would be fantastic if it wasn't for the artists. So that's who Randy was dealing with.
Well, he just parted ways with Brian Adams. I was reading just like the other day that Brian's no longer working with Bruce. So there's a story there. But you were there, Ian, at Tears Are Not Enough, because we talked about it, and you didn't. I don't know. You didn't grab somebody and say, "Hey, let's fly my brother in here. He's a big deal from SCTV." But no, you were.
Well, I didn't bring that up because I think the whole thing was very last minute. I think I got a phone call simply because I was on the Anthem roster. So both Kim Mitchell and I were sort of invited. I don't know if were the Rush guy? The Rush guys were on that,
Getty had a big verse. Like he's one of the key.
Yeah. Okay.
key-
Right.
Yeah.
So that was basically Ray Daniels. Yeah, let's get some more of my label guys in there. So, of course, both Kim and I were delighted to do it.
Right.
And, we saw all the people jockeying for camera position. So Kim and I went right to the back row, just intentionally.
Oh, you're talking about Mark Holmes from Platinum Blonde. Is that who you're talking about? He arrived in a limousine, which I think is rather interesting considering this was for famine relief in Africa. It just seems like an interesting optic to arrive.
Well, if they had more limousines in Africa, they wouldn't be starving.
Maybe he was making a political point there.
Yeah, I think that was his point. But I wouldn't know anything about this because, as you know,
You were in
I
LA.
was shunned.
Well, this is scandalous. Okay, we're going to update the Wikipedia page. But just to wrap this up, Ian, we also talked about you on SCTV. And later in this chat, we're going to talk about how your professional lives, Dave and Ian, would intersect. And of course, there's that SCTV crossover, and we'll talk about all those ways you intersected. But Hamilton Mike, when he heard the Thomas brothers were coming on Toronto Mike, he's a Hamilton guy. His name's Hamilton Mike. He wanted to know how growing up in Hamilton shaped you, or if you even believe it did. Could you just talk a little bit about growing up in Hamilton and how it made you the man you are today?
Well, first of all, we were in Dundas, and we didn't get there. We were in North Carolina for a period of time, and then we moved back to Canada, and we were in Dundas, not Hamilton. So Dundas we weren't even in the busy metropolis of Hamilton. We were in the sleepy valley town, Dundas. So
Actually had people that you satirized with Bob and Doug. We did actually go to school with people, the Hazagorny and you knob and all of that dialogue. And Dundas sorry.
No.
I was just going to say, Dundas, when we moved there, it was a very visibly striated society. And there was this huge sort of a dying industrial level. But in those days, M.A. Henry, the toy factory, is where a lot of the greasers would go to work. There was the Valley City Industries. So there was this whole industrial layer. And then you had the bedroom community of McMaster University. So there were striations that were really quite visible in the social structure in Dundas that I'd never really noticed before.
Just for Hamilton Mike, so that he doesn't feel left out here. I worked at National Steel Car in Hamilton one summer. It was probably the most horrible job that any human being could ever have making. I was a stone grinder on the 5th line, grinding the rough weld inside the railway cars. I also worked at Diamond Gyms in the Thirsty Eye for Max Mintz and the Papalia brothers, Frank and Johnny Papalia, who were Hamilton Mafia. And I bartended some private parties for the Papalia brothers. So, and was very familiar with their legit business, Monarch Vending, and the whole deal. So, you know, I did have some experience in Hamilton between National Steel Car and Diamond Gyms. And then, of course, McMaster, the only university with a nuclear reactor, the only university feared by other universities that it might lash out and unleash the terror of nuclear bombs.
Ian, did you go to McMaster?
What?
Did Ian go to McMaster?
No,
He was already a success. He didn't have to go.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. What were you gonna say?
I signed with RCA right out of grade 13. And I did I was interested in actually doing a music course. I think Rochester had a great music school. It was a wonderful university, but I thought I'd try the music business. And so here I am still. But Dave and I did stuff together at Mac, and also Mac was a great venue. You know, my band, my then folk group, got to open for, you know, a couple of big
The association. I was there that night.
Yeah, that was.
I was so proud of him. I was so proud of him because they killed before the association came on. They were the opening act. That's the worst thing that can ever happen to a band, is the opening act kills, because then you got to come out and top them. And I was aware of that. And then the head, I forget his name, the lead guy from the association came out.
Terry Kirkman.
Before they left the stage, and put his arm around Ian and said, Tranquility Base is the best vocal group we have ever heard. And I was sitting there right in the front row, and I thought, well, good for him. Look at that.
So Ian, you break first, right? You might be a couple of years younger than Dave, but you break first in terms of aspiring fame.
You did.
Well, I got into the business of music sooner, and was playing sort of the folk circuit, etc. And then when Catherine got pregnant, and David was in the business of education at that point, but even at Mac, we ended up writing a rock musical together. And Gene and Marty were in it, and Dave, and it was a lot of fun. It was a rock musical on Frankenstein. So even then, I think that was the first thing we ever sort of did, together.
Yeah.
And then I got hired at CBC, and I got a national slot with 2 hours. It was the first program that played any rock music on CBC. It was just still playing kind of exclusively big band, jazz, or folk music. And we had comedy inserts on that. And Dave, at this point, was handing in some work as a potential writer to some people. And so he and Gene,
I sold 5 scripts to Jack Humphreys. That was the first, while I was doing my master's degree, that was the first scripts that I ever sold, my entry into showbiz.
I'd forgotten.
And then Ian generously hires me, Eugene, and this other guy, Don Dickinson, to play comedy stuff with a CBC announcer named George McLean. And so we did these little 15-minute comedy inserts, and we got paid to do it. And we all needed money at that time. So it was a really generous thing for Ian to do that, but it also helped us too, because it gave us some place to, hone our comedy chops and also get paid.
Yeah.
Amazing. Like I knew that your professional lives intersected in here and there, but I didn't realize that that leg up that your younger brother Ian was giving you there with that CBC gig. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and then Dave gave me my first film score for a. Yeah, I've done a couple of dozen movie scores now, and but that one was really informative to me. It was a film he did. I think it was for Showtime. It was
Yeah,
called
it was
1776.
No, it was the Incredible Time Travels of Henry Osgood.
No, 1776 was
Oh, right. You did that first. That wasn't for Showtime.
with Saul Rubinek as George Washington's ne'er-do-well brother.
Twisted Evil Brother.
Yeah.
Catherine O'Hara was in it. Eugene was in it. Maury Chaikin was in it.
I think Marty and Catherine were in it as well, weren't
Yeah,
they?
Marty was in it. Yeah, I said Catherine, but Marty was also in it. Marty played an insane fur trapper.
Amazing. And when you were Dave, just moments ago, you were talking about how proud you were when you saw your brother opening up for the association and how he kicked ass, and you were so proud. But I feel this great. What I love is that you guys seem to have such pride for the other sibling. Like I can hear it going both ways here. Just immense pride. I don't know, Dave. Just real quickly off the top of your head, what's your favorite Ian Thomas song of all time?
It's sort of a toss-up between Pilot and Hold On.
Both great songs. And
Which
wait,
he made Santana famous with that. They would have been hacks.
no Ian, no Santana. Now,
That's right.
what about what about you, Ian? What's your favorite all-time Dave Thomas vehicle or Dave Thomas project?
Well, it would have to be a piece he had written for one of the projects. He did some stuff on the new show, it was called, that just put me down. I was laughing so hard. It was just there was
You liked it when Candy and I went off book. I remember that.
That was fantastic. So you're doing a live, he's doing a live broadcast, and he and John Candy. It was a wonderful moment to observe because I sort of knew a little bit about the chemistry of Dave and John and how much they like to play. And when the script went out the window, the giveaway on the script going out of the window was they were doing the scene with Buck. What's his name?
Buck Henry.
Buck Henry, and his eyes were out like organ stops because he thought you guys were just going to leave him there high and dry. He didn't know that you could improv and throw him his setup lines for his own dialogue at the same time. And it was a scene on Andropov, whether he was alive or dead. And one of you sort of was a general and the other was Andropov in the bed, right? God,
well,
that was one of my
Andropov was supposedly sick, and then there were rumors that he had died. So it was a scene that took place in his hospital room.
Right.
And Candy came to visit. I played the sick Andropov. And so, yeah, but yeah, John was fearless. He liked to play around, and I loved that.
So I loved some skits that maybe you've never seen before. I think one of the moments I loved the most was when Bob and Doug came on the Junos, and they did not give a damn about the music business. And it was so wonderful to have somebody completely irreverent making fun of this celebration of the Canadian music business. And it was just I had never seen that much levity in the Juno Awards, and it actually relaxed the whole building because it can be a very stuffy climate, and the Juno Awards, they're often kind of a kiss of death. One year you get 5 awards, the next year you're waiting on tables. So now you're at the Juno Awards because you maybe got invited, but nobody wants to talk to you because you're kind of not the thing in that
Right.
moment. And
But that's showbiz. That's
Yeah,
you know what I
sure.
mean?
yeah,
There's a movie called The Oscar, with Stephen Boyd playing kind of a Frank Sinatra character. And Peter Lawford is one of the actors that's in the stable of actors with Stephen Boyd. And then Stephen Boyd's going out for dinner the night before the Oscars, and the maitre d' comes up, and it's Peter Lawford. And he goes, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And he goes, "Oh, well, and then there's an awkward moment, and he says, "Let me take you to your table, sir." And Stephen Boyd is, "No, no, no, no." He really hammed his way through that. He chewed up the scenery, but he was just horrified that this peer, this actor that he knew, was now waiting tables. So it's part of the business. I thought of a line today that I want to use somewhere, which is, when somebody circles back to me, I know I'm in show business. Because that's a new thing in
Right.
show business. Well, yeah, we're going to circle back to you on. We're going to circle back. Fuck off. I don't want anyone to circle back to me. Just
well, they've got to see if there's anybody more important first.
Right. Right. All right. So you brought up Bob and Doug McKenzie. So I just need to ask Dave and even you, Ian, because I know you're buddies. But do we have a Rick Moranis update? Like, I had heard at some point there was going to be another Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and then that never seemed to happen. Like, it never actually got filmed. And I'm just wondering, is Rick back to retirement, or is he still going to make a little bit of a comeback? Do we know?
okay. This is probably, you're going to get an exclusive here.
Okay.
We just did some more spots for Beer Canada.
Oh, I know this because Larry
this
McInnes
week.
is an FOTM. Yeah, Larry McInnes gave me.
Oh, okay. He's so Larry was the producer of it. I didn't even know this was going to happen until recently, and we just did these spots last week, and they came back to it because we did it last year,
right,
for the escalator tax, to Bob and Doug protesting the tax on alcohol that's tied to inflation with the escalator tax. And so apparently, I don't think Bob and Doug could take credit for it, but there were a lot of reasons. But the projected increase was 9% and it ended up becoming 2%. So we got lumped in there with the factors that might have made that a success. And then they came back to us this year in the new year and said, "Do you want to do some more?" And we were like, that'll be just fine.
Dave, okay, so you're exclusive, which I was very excited about. Like, I had that moment of like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna get an exclusive from Dave Thomas. And then I realized, oh, Larry McInnes, who's been on the program, and he's like posting about this on social media. Like, there's no exclusive here. I feel like you owe me one.
All right. You want an inside track on Rick? I don't think Rick is gonna do a Honey, I Shrunk the Kid. I think that's off the table.
Right.
And I don't think that's an exclusive. I just think that, time is the keeper there.
Right.
But to use a phrase that Ian may popularize, but I think that we got a few things sitting out in the can there. There's that so-called SCTV reunion that was directed by Martin Scorsese.
Can you read my notes here, Dave? I need to know, is there any update on the Martin Scorsese filmed SCTV reunion that has never seen the light of day?
Well, he apparently got too busy with his De Niro, DiCaprio Flower Moon movie to edit it. So it's sitting on an editing room floor somewhere. And Marty said that Jimmy Kimmel might get involved since he hosted the live interview that we did in Toronto, but I think there's a pretty good probability that that show will never be seen, which is so weird because Netflix spent a lot of money on it. I mean, Scorsese's not cheap, and we all did pretty good. So,
Ian, you were there, right?
No,
You weren't there. Okay. I have talked to people who were there because I'm thinking, well, maybe it was like, no offense, Dave, maybe it was shitty or like maybe it sucked, but everyone who was there says it was great. So we've got this great reunion footage. Rick Moranis is there, for goodness sakes. He doesn't do a lot. He did that benefit for Ian for Your Son, but he doesn't do very much. And it's mind-boggling to me that this footage is just going to collect dust in a warehouse and never see the light of day. That's sounds like I'm not a religious man, but this sounds like a sin.
well, hopefully, if you can accept Jesus Christ as your personal savior and come to God, maybe something can happen with that show. Because you're right, it is a sin, possibly even a mortal sin. So now the question is, what are you going to do about it, and how many prayers are you going to offer?
What are you going to do about it? Like you must be personally disappointed that the whole gang got back together in that great venue, and you have a good director and you have a good host and it's well produced, or you'd think it would be well produced. Like you must be pissed off.
No,
Kind of rile
I'm
you
not
up.
actually. First of all, it's been so long that it's kind of comical, and there was a lot of stuff involved in doing that show that wasn't part of it. The show was the tip of the iceberg, and there was a lot of other stuff going on. And I have to say, it was great to get back together and work with these people again after all these years. But there was also some trepidation, and I know that some of the cast didn't want to try to reprise what we had done 40 years ago. And there is an argument for that. I mean, there's a ton of documentaries and reboots of old ideas, and it's a sad statement that there's not enough new things going on out there to keep people occupied, or that the bandwidth for broadcast is so wide now that it needs so much material that's got to go back like a snake and eat its own tail. But there is an aspect to it that is kind of boring, that you go back and celebrate your past, and instead of doing something new.
Ian, what are your thoughts on the fact this SCTV? Because I mean, hearing Dave there is like, am I supposed like? It's not like we're going to make a Grace Under Fire. Maybe there should be a Grace Under Fire documentary by Martin Scorsese. But Ian, what do you think about the fact this SCTV documentary Scorsese was supposedly working on might never see the light of day?
well, it seems like a lot of wasted effort for a lot of money, and Netflix is probably the most angry person in the mix. But I understand the dynamics. It's like trying to reassemble a band that has been apart, and each and every member of the band has new artistic endeavors that interest them more. So, the idea of going back and being asked to, do some of the old hits collectively again, not a very inspiring idea creatively, perhaps. So, maybe it's a totally different dynamic than well, maybe it's an interesting dynamic that doesn't make necessarily for good TV. It's not really biographical, so you don't know what the expectations of reassembling that cast again were. And so, yeah, I think by that time you had a whole pile of different solo artists assembled into a room, and it's like trying to herd cats. So I think there were probably difficulties there that maybe it looks too complex for Scorsese to want to try and make something out of it. And he's kind of an interesting character, that Scorsese, how I think some people do most of the legwork for documentaries and put all the pieces together for him, and he sort of, jumps in as the great director of it all. For example, the big band thing, the finale of the band,
Last Waltz.
The Last Waltz. I mean, that was basically a musical event that was assembled, and he just basically shot it. And so all the content was there in the songs, and the people who all wanted to get together, not necessarily to be parts of the same band, to have their own moments to shine, right? So I don't know. And I've seen a couple of Scorsese documentaries, and I don't really know what he does. I think his company and his name brings some cachet to it. But I think the documentary has to pretty much make itself. That
Well,
just from sitting back, that's sort of my analogy.
Toronto Mike, how about this?
Yes,
How
sir.
about we circle back to you later with a better answer for this? Because I know that you're looking for something, and I'm not sure that either of us gave you what you wanted.
Well, maybe I'm looking for, yeah, I might be looking for something that doesn't actually exist, and maybe what you gave me is what I needed. Maybe there's a song in there for Ian to write, but I would like to go. I like to circle back. So we were sort of starting this process of like when your two professional careers intersected, and Ian talked about doing the score to that film, and you talked about like I would love to keep going. A lot of people will tell me, oh, they loved it when Ian appeared on SCTV, like when Ian had his cameo appearance on SCTV and he played songs and stuff. Like maybe if you don't mind spending a little time telling me in more detail, having both of you on, like times when Ian and Dave intersected professionally.
Well, SCTV was my big brother being my big brother, because I had an album out then. And he said, hey, Ian, if you came on Second City, would that help sell some of your albums? And I said, sure, I think it would, television.
Well,
would
it
be
was an
great.
NBC network show at that time, so it would help him. Hey, if you can't help your own brother, who the hell can you help?
Right.
But for me, the best time that I had with Ian was a stage show that we put together called Brothers Forever. And
That was
that
fun.
was an opportunity for us to write something, but also to perform on stage in front of audiences for several nights together and watch the other guy at work. And I have to say, Ian and I diverge. He was the musician, I was the comedian. But Ian's funny, and he's a great raconteur and storyteller. And I hadn't been to his concerts because I've been here in LA running around like a rat in a bathtub trying to make a living. And so I didn't know what he did on stage. And then when I got a chance to be on stage with him and see what he did, I was more proud of him than I was that night at the association concert, because there were plenty of those nights where I would just kind of lose my place because I'd be just sitting there watching him as he did his stuff and thinking, oh, that's really good. Oh, I didn't know you were that good. That's really good. And so I was impressed, and he got to see what a lame ass live performer his brother is, because I get bored so fast. And when I know what the lines are going to be, I just start to go in different directions sometimes. And so just to see what'll happen, because I'm curious, and it doesn't always work. You know what I mean? I'll go, but I don't care if I bomb. That's what's happened over the years, is having been on stage and in front of audiences as much as I do, bombing is just as interesting as really doing well. So I'll go there just to see what will
Let's see where
happen.
the parameters are.
Yeah, I just want to see what would happen instead of doing the line that I'm supposed to do here. What if I did this instead? I wonder what would happen. So, so there was a little bit of that. But it was a real fun brothers experience to
For
be on
what?
stage together and to watch the other guy work. And he forced me to sing, and I'm not a singer, but I sang a couple of songs with him, kind of backup, and it was fun. It was just, and some of the audiences, I mean, when you're doing, I know this from Second City Stage, when you're doing a stage show, it's different every night. And some nights you'll just click. Some nights you'll just hit the groove and it'll be like nothing you do is wrong. You just kill. And we had a couple of those nights that just went just like butter. And that's a fun thing to experience with your brother.
Yeah, it is. And the writing of that show, to me, I agree with my brother. It was a lovely experience for me too. I don't agree with him in terms of his performance. I thought a lot of stuff he did during the show was hilarious. And the joy of that thing to me, though, was the writing of it. When we hung out at your place, and we were just dying laughing coming up with some of this stuff. And that was actually almost more fun than touring, because Dave's point is well taken. And I know this from singing the same songs sometimes over and over on tours, and you hope something goes wrong. So something fresh enters into the
Yeah,
atmosphere.
it's exciting.
So yeah, exactly. So I loved that every moment of doing that with Dave. And the month, I forget, I was down there for a couple of weeks when we wrote the bulk of it. And it was just, honestly, it was just so much fun. So
I love writing, and there's nothing more interesting to me than a blank page, because it can be anything. And I the kind of I have very kind of lowbrow entertainment tastes. I mean, here's an example of all the rides at Disneyland. My favorite is probably one of the cheesiest. It's the Peter Pan ride, because you're in this little thing, and then you're in the bedroom of Wendy and the other kids, and then you go out the window. You go out the window and you fly over the city. Anytime in a story, in a book, in a TV show, in a play, where the writer says, "Hey, what if we open this window here and go out there? Ooh, what's going to be there?" You don't know what's going to be there, and that to me that's the joy of writing, and that's the kind of entertainment that I like the most. And I love the blank page because it's like a window that opens and you can go anywhere. And
the same is true with, I think, with writing music.
yeah,
The
I
joy
bet.
of it is discovery, and then when you play it, you have to play it in. That's not to say I don't enjoy playing. I do enjoy playing. By the end of the tour, I'm weary on some songs for sure. But I can think of a lot of worse things to do than sing a song you've sung a million times. So the creating of, that's why I think David has been a writer kind of front and foremost. He was the head writer on SCTV. He's written his way through life. And I'm quite similar. Even when record companies didn't want anything to do with me, I'm still writing songs. It's there you get back to the Affliction or analogy that the creative juices, you have to do it. And
That's it. You
yeah,
have to do it.
yeah,
You know what I mean? I write because I have to.
yeah.
And like when I thought of that circle back joke, I just thought, yeah, I got to do something with that. First of all, it's not worded exactly right, but I'll find that. I every day is like that to me. It's just like there's a new thing to write and a new opportunity to think of something. And I found a way to make the rewriting and the structuring, once you had the idea, once you've gone out the window and you've figured out where the world that you're going to play is, I figured out how to make the construction part of it fun too, because that's a part of the process as well. You know, you can't just wing it, go out there and then just wing it. You have to have structure. The audience is comforted by structure. Structure allows them to sit back and go, ooh, oh, all right. Oh, I know this. Oh, this is, you know what I mean? It gives them a way to participate in the experience. So, so I found a great deal of pleasure in that too. And then I also found rewriting, you know, every time I write anything, I'll think, oh, this is pretty good. And then I'll read it the next day and I'll go, what the hell was I thinking? This is just shit.
Yeah.
I cannot believe I wrote something this bad, and then I got to start fixing it, you know. And I collaborate a lot with other writers, and I have the reputation of being demo Dave. Like I'll get halfway through something and I'll go, you know what, this stinks, and we shouldn't do it at all. It was like, well, no, Dave, wait, we've spent a couple of months on this, you know, you can't demo this now. And I go, yeah, it's no good. It doesn't work. And I don't know what we were thinking, but it stinks, you know. And sometimes I can get back on track, and sometimes I dump it. And I've got quite a few unfinished things that I just looked at and thought, yeah,
You
that's
sound like Scorsese.
yeah. Well, if that's what happened with him, if that's what he looked at the footage of SCTV and went, nah, it stinks, then okay, I can accept that. But after seeing his most recent movie, I think he could have left some of that on the cutting room floor too.
I felt the same way about The Irishman too. Like he's not really much for editing these days, Martin Scorsese. So
And those old hoods, they looked like gorgons with their makeup. They just looked horrible. It was just like, oh my God, release the Kraken. It was just, and this latest thing that he did, I didn't know he had been the scriptwriter. This is bad, really, to be trashing this guy when
he's a legend. You can
did a
trash
show.
him. Yeah.
But okay, honestly, the end of this movie is a radio play. And so he goes all the way through it, and it's like he ran out of money and couldn't finish it on the location, and so he goes, oh, I know. People will love this. I'll do it as an old 30s radio play. And he didn't even have the actors who were in the front part of the movie. He's got sound-alike actors in the radio play. And I just thought, oh man, what a cheeseball ending. This wasn't set up in the beginning. So it's obvious you weren't planning on going this way. And you just did this about face at the end. It's very transparent that he just ran out of money.
I haven't seen it yet, but I want to see it. And you've just
spoiler alert.
Okay. Spoiler alert. Okay. So gentlemen, I've taken already 70 minutes and I'm now begging you, Toronto Mike is begging for another 15 or so. Would you do 15 more minutes?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay,
Let Ian talk for 15 now. I've been hogging it.
Well, Ian, okay, let me ask Ian, because we talked about your professional lives intersecting and the two big points where I get the most question. One is, of course, SCTV, which we talked about. In 1981, you had a cameo on The Great White North. And, of course, Strange Brew. Ian, can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved with Strange Brew? You wrote and recorded the theme song.
Yeah, Dave and Rick called me. They had hired a guy to do the score in LA. It was their first cinematic experience, so they hired a guy with a good cinematic rep as film composer. And
the studio made us hire him.
Okay,
it wasn't our choice.
It was still a sensible thing to do with your first feature film. But anyway, they didn't have an opening or a closing, and I get this call from Dave and Rick. It was on a Thursday. I remember it was on a Thursday, and they asked me if I'd be willing to try and write an opening and closing. So. And they wanted kind of a song as well that they could maybe do a video with that would trailer, maybe be a trailer or whatever. So I wrote a couple of ideas over the next 24 hours, and I called them back on the Friday, and they both liked the take on the song that I ended up doing. So I finished writing that song. I was in the studio recording it on the so I finished the song by the Saturday. I had finished writing the song. I recorded it on the Sunday and mixed it on the Sunday, FedExed it on the Monday, and they started mixing the film on the Tuesday. So that's how tight a window it was. And the piece ended up working well. And the late great Dave Cooper played his ass off on guitar on that track. I listened to it about a month ago. Somebody had, I think, posted it on my Facebook or something, and I hadn't heard the track for years. I just went, "Oh, listen to Dave Cooper on that track. He was fantastic." So that's how it came about, and so they had a deadline. I met the deadline, and I thought the track sort of worked with the film. It gave them there was at least a rock and roll edge, which I think Bob and Doug needed. And Dave Cooper's electric guitar was fantastic. And it also had some nice sort of contemporary pop synthesis going on. Terry Watkinson from Max Webster came in, and I had some parts I wanted him to play. And, like the little stops, back on, very sort of Thomas Dolby kind of stuff. So it gave them a contemporary thing at the same time. For me, it was just fun. It was a challenge. Can you write and record and get this to us in a couple of days? And so it was fun working under the clock. And actually, the deliverables were hilarious. I had to deliver a 4-track tape. It was 2 tracks, stereo tracks, 1 buffer track with nothing on it, and a 60 cycle pulse on track 4. There was no synchronization code in those days. There was no SMPTE code. It was just 60. You would lock with 60 cycle pulses. Anyway, that's the story behind writing that track.
All right, here's another story of us working together with Ian as a score, writing the score. First of all, the process of scoring a movie when you direct it, and I only did a few turns as a director, but you have to put a temp score in, or the studio will kill the picture in the rough cut. If they can't hear it with music and some sound effects, you're screwed. And so you end up sometimes hiring a music director to temp score a picture for you, so that the studio can look at it and go, oh, okay, cut this out, change this. Otherwise, if they see it without a score, they just toss it. They go, this is It's funny how people whose job it is to look at pictures have no concept of how to look at a picture at an early stage like that, but it's true. So cut 2 years later, I'm doing this Canadian movie called White Coats, and I asked Ian to score it for me. And I put a temp score together, and there was a couple of places where I put songs in. And there was a song in this sort of really hilarious romance love thing with Dave Foley and an actress named Ingrid Kavlar. And the perfect song for it was Etta James, At Last. So that was in the temp score. Well, this is where it becomes dangerous when you temp score a picture, because then you fall in love with the temp score. And I came to Ian and I said, okay, we got no money for At Last. We can't buy that. So I need a song that's exactly like that, but not that. Well, he knocked it out of the park. Wow. He not only wrote a song that had the same feel, but a completely unique and different song, but he found a singer that knocked it out of the park like Etta James did. And I was blown away. Now that when you bring somebody in to score a movie, when they can do something like that, that's amazing.
Ian, what song is this?
I think I might have been called True Love or something. Molly Johnson came in and sang it for me.
Oh, I know Molly.
Malster is I've known her forever. And when you have Molly over to sing, well, just keep the coffee on, and you're going to be chatting for at least 2 hours before you sing the first note. So she came in and she was just killer. She did a wonderful job on it. And it was just a song with a really might have been Real Love or True Love or something like. But it was, the lyric was redundant, like it was honest. It really is real love. So it just kept kind of making fun of itself at the same time. But it served the scene well, as did the template. So the choice of having a song like that for this, it was two kind of nasty people who finally just look at each other and go, it's a very, very animal scene. So it was great fun to underscore.
Dave,
That's a great description of it, Ian.
You'll be pleased to know that there's a photo of Molly Johnson and I in front of the Toronto Tree, as it is now known.
Okay.
Oh,
Yes, indeed.
that's fantastic.
Again, I will respect your time because I could do another hour, so I will try to wrap up really quickly. But I do actually, Rock Golf wrote this in. He said, I'd love an update on how Ian's son Jake is doing. How is Jake doing, Ian?
Creatively, he's motoring forward. He's just released his first feature film documentary called Adaptation, and it's available on Apple and a whole pile of streamers now. With regard to his paraplegia, he is experiencing very disconcerting neuropathic pain. And he has to have some kind of medical procedure because he can't continue with this pain. He fights it every day. It'll be like his legs are on fire or his thighs are broken or he's got a Charlie horse, it's just, and it grips him like grand mal seizures some days. He's managed to fight his way through. I mean, he's been actively editing television programs for the last 5 years, putting his wife through med school and feeding his kids. He's been just an amazing Mr. Mom. But we got to find an answer to this pain soon. And it's medical. The field of medicine, we're really not that far along from bloodletting, as far as I'm concerned. When it comes to spinal cord injuries, it's like that whole gelatinous thing known as the spinal cord is some sort of alien implant that we can't wrap our heads around the technology at all. So that's kind of the update on Jake. He amazes me as a father. He amazes me as a creative individual to fight through all of that and still output creative work is just mind-boggling to me. So that's the update on my lovely son Jake.
Well, I hope we can remedy his pain. I hope we can ease his pain here. That's
and you have to talk about this Dave and his pals. When Jake had his accident, Marty was on the phone to Dave immediately. We have to do a fundraiser. And Gene and Catherine jumped on, and Robin Duke and all these people gave. Danny Aykroyd came. What was
Geddy
it?
Lee.
Pardon me?
Geddy Lee.
Geddy came and sang, yeah. And also Rick was not willing to do Bob and Doug for the Scorsese thing, but he said he would put on the toque for Jake.
wow.
And, so that really, when you get into the sort of thick and thin there are serious connections in this group of people that will come to if one of them is in distress, they focus. And when Getty and Alex donated to the auction scenario, I think between the two of them, they raised about 60 grand. And I heard Alex being interviewed, and why'd you do that thing? And he said, well, because it dealt with the son of one of our brothers. And when he said that, I wept like a baby. It was just such a sweet moment, an embrace. And I wept like a baby the day everybody showed up for the rehearsal, and I had to go to the bathroom for a few minutes and just hide in a cubicle. And it was just powerful. So you want to talk about some connections. Well, there's some connections, that there are some connections as human beings. I used to love that John Candy was, when John was alive, that he and Dave were down there, because it's LA, as you know, is the sincerity capital of the universe. And I always loved that Dave had somebody to play with, because I didn't worry about him being down in that soulless, godforsaken land. And Marty's part of that, and so's Paul Schaefer. And I love the connections those boys have. And I always feel good that my brother's friends are part of his, basically part of his life and part of his well-being, as are some of my good friends. And boy, friends, the older you get, play a really important role in your life. So there's my Sermon on the Mount.
Well, that's actually really beautiful that everybody came together as a community, and what a sweetheart Rick sounds like, a true sweetheart here, that he would do that too, that he would don the toque.
Yeah, put on the. I mean, he was going to.
Because that's a big thing for him. He doesn't want to. They courted him for the Ghostbusters sequel, and Ivan Reitman's son was directing, and it was, they made it really difficult for him to say no. And he got as far as the costume fitting, and he put on the costume and the glasses, and he just looked in the mirror and he said, I can't do this. I could do this when I was in my 20s. I could act like that stupid nerd in my 20s. I'm in my 60s, I'm almost 70. I can't do that. I can't do it. And I completely understand that. Do you know what I mean? Putting on toques and parkas and playing Bob and Doug when we were in our 20s was easy. When you get old, it's just like, oh, come on. Here's a story about being old that I think is why showbiz is and rightly should be for young people. That movie that Ian did the song for, White Coats, there was a scene in it where I had a scene with Dave Foley and another young actor named Peter Oldring, who was about 10 years younger than Dave Foley. And Dave Foley's about 10 years younger than me. And so I was directing, and I would play back the take afterwards, and if the actors saw anything that they wanted to fix, we'd do another take. It was very collaborative. And we played back this take, and Foley looks at it and goes, oh God. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, no, it's not the take. He said, it's just me. It's just my face. He said, when I think of myself, he said, I think I look more like Peter. But when I actually see myself on camera, I realize I look more like Dave. And that made me laugh, because it's true. It's true. And when you start to see old faces, especially people that you haven't seen for years, and then suddenly they're on camera and it's like, do you know what I mean? You expect them to look the way they always looked,
Right.
and they don't. And what was the guy's name who played Hopalong Cassidy? Was it William Boyd?
Yeah.
Yeah. He refused to be seen when he turned 50 or something. He wouldn't come out He wouldn't put on the mask, and he was so popular back then with the kids, but he wouldn't do it because he was too old and he didn't want the people to see him old. And I completely understand that, you
Well,
know?
you know, it's better than getting old. I mean, getting old, I should say, is better than the alternative. And I'm going to close by asking you about just a couple of people we lost recently. In 1974, you won a Juno, right, Ian? You won a Juno for most promising male vocalist of the year.
Promises, promises. Yeah.
It wasn't the kiss of death for you, right? It was because for sometimes you don't ever hear from that artist again, but that luckily wasn't the case for you. But the reason I'm bringing up 1974 is because you also went on tour with April Wine.
Yeah.
Miles Goodwin, who has also been on the show, he's an FOTM. Miles Goodwin passed away in 2023. And I'm just wondering if you have any memories of that 1970, any memories at all of Miles Goodwin.
Well, they were they were one of the first. The Stampeders and April Wine were amongst the first bands to tour Canada. And it was so primitive when they were playing some of the arenas, the Stampeders, for example, they had to take an electrician who would illegally climb up a phone pole to a transformer and hook in to that transformer to power their lights and sound, because the arena just had a one microphone with a horn PA system.
Right.
So these guys were true pioneers of touring. So I walked into a tour I had been a CBC producer for a couple of years, and before that, a folkie and son of a philosophy professor. This was culture shock for me. Now I'm opening in arenas, and I wasn't really an arena act. It's like I felt like a guy who knew a couple of card tricks trying to play to 5,000 people. And April Wine had huge amps, and we had all acoustic, 3 acoustic guitars, bass and drums and keys, and it was all harmonies and acoustic guitars. And so it was an interesting experience. And their road manager, I think they called him Rags, he had a gun. This guy had a gun because he collected the money every night. So it's like, Jesus, what have I gotten myself into here? So I remember liking April Wine as actually Fast Train, that I think it was their very first song, was actually one of my favorites because that guitar break at the end was spectacular, just before the outro. And I loved when he got playful on songs like Enough is Enough. She's my girl and enough is enough. There were great guitar parts in that.
Yeah.
So I loved that stuff about him. And I kept bumping into him over the years. And he sent me a draft of his bio before it was published to check it out, because he knew I had written a couple of books and wanted an opinion. So we touched base over the years. The experience for me, though, it made me realize, first of all, how far away from ever wanting to play arenas I was. The idea of having to put on a Ringling Brothers level show did not interest me in the slightest.
Right.
So I was sort of a reluctant live performer. Now I'm doing theaters, and I love doing theater tours. It's like a living room concert to me more. But anything over about 1,200 seats, and it starts getting stupid. So that was a revelation to me, and that's when I realized my true love was writing and recording. And it was interesting that Miles would come out to see me. So he seemed to. There was some validation that came from Miles over the years as well. But there was a guy who was really dedicated to his fans. And he was always thinking about his fans when he was writing. And I was a selfish asshole. I just wrote when I felt like writing. And, to my own detriment, sometimes my albums were more like anthologies than a single album by a single artist. This song would be over here. This one would be over there. There'd be a song about the birth of my son. Well, rock and rollers don't want to do songs like that. So I realized how different we were. And yet at the same time, we were comrades in arms.
Now, a name you dropped but an hour ago, Dave, was Brian McConaughey. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about, Brian? He wrote for SCTV, and we lost him very recently.
Brian wrote for the trifecta of comedy in the 70s. He wrote for National Lampoon, and he was one of the key writers that shaped the magazine and made it the success it was with Doug Kenny. He wrote for SNL and he wrote for SCTV. So those were the three big guns in the 70s of comedy. And he was on, I think it was Letterman, and he quoted me. He said that I had described him as the Clark Kent of comedy, which I did, because he had these glasses. He looked like Clark Kent. He had black hair. He was tall too. He was like 6'2" or 6'3". And I remember introducing Brian to Max von Sydow, because I put Brian in Strange Brew, and he played Max's assistant. And Max was all about his physicality. That's who he was. And Max was in the makeup room, and Brian came to the set. And I said, "Oh, come on, I want you to meet Max. You're going to be working with him." And so I brought him in. And when Brian came into the trailer, Brian's quite tall, and Max looked at him, and he stood up right away. And Max said to him, "Nice to meet you. You're quite tall. How tall are you?" And Brian said, "Oh, I'm 6'2", or Max went, "I'm 6'3". And so it was these tall guys, these tall trees in the world of entertainment, comparing heights. And Brian had a very unique and strange mind. And he wrote he came up with a concept for SCTV that became one of the infamous pieces on the show, not because everybody loved it, but because it became a production nightmare. But Brian came to me and he said, "I had this idea, Dave. What if the Vikings in the year 980 decided to torment the English even more, and they added bees to their raids?" So I started laughing, and I thought, that is so fucking stupid. What is? And he said, so we'd have a long ship with Vikings and beekeepers in those white things with the hoods and the smokers. And I started laughing, and I said, "Okay, this is great." So I was the head writer, and I sort of muscled that through, and I wrote it with him. Well, cut to the day of production. Somebody comes to me and says, "Dave, we had a problem with the gimbal." And we were busy on SCTV. We were doing multiple sketches, and I said, "The gimbal? What are you talking about?" "Well, we put the Viking boat. They built a 40-foot Viking boat for this scene, and they put it on a gimbal. This is a big mechanical thing so that it would simulate the waves." And they said the gimbal's too loud, and we can't do audio with the gimbal. And I said, "Why is it even on a gimbal?" How did the production got ahead of us and didn't even check in to see? So they take it off the gimbal and they just put it on the flat studio floor. And I said, "Just lay in a bunch of smoke like mist." And anyway, this sketch became a problematic piece to shoot, and it was just taking forever. And the studio was hot, and everybody was in these, half the cast was in these hot, furry Viking costumes. And John Candy was particularly miserable in his costume. And when John got miserable, that's when you didn't want to fuck with the guy. He could get really nasty when he got miserable. And so the producer decided, you know what, we got to get this scene. So we're going to go all night, or you're going to have to shoot all night. And John didn't want to go all night. So John called the Four Seasons and got the bartender there to come to the studio after he finished at the Four Seasons at 1 o'clock in the morning and set up a full bar, which John paid for, at the studio. And people started drinking. And so now, in addition to having difficulty logistically in shooting this thing, everybody's drunk. And about 2:30 in the morning, when Ivan, the hairdresser, threw up in the Viking boat, we wrapped, and John was really happy. So that became one of the sort of legendary pieces, and it was Brian. It came out of Brian McConaughey's head. And he used to call me Chimney Boy because he had a character called Chimney Boy, which was basically a chimney sweep from, Mary Poppins, England. And what would happen if that chimney boy was the main character? And so he wrote a piece, and it was a very obscure and weird piece, like Vikings and beekeepers, and but that's the way his mind worked. He was hilarious. He was funny. I loved him, and I miss him dearly.
Yeah, sorry for your loss. Go ahead, Ian.
It's just funny. I mean, so this is the very thing that I've always loved about Dave. His mind is like that as well. So coming up with a premise, first of all, called Vikings and beekeepers. Well, how about Dave's Frightened Family that you did with Johnny? He had wigs that would shoot up off their heads.
Okay, now wait a minute. Here's what happened here. Okay, so I'm doing the new show, and I'm in the makeup chair, and the woman who was doing the hair on the show had also done Sweeney Todd, and she was talking to me about these wigs that she made for Sweeney Todd, and she said that when he comes up out of the cellar and he's killed somebody for the first time, they had this thing where is a flap of hair on a wig that was glued to his forehead would come up like that to indicate the horror of what he had done. And it was activated by some monofilament that ran through that attached to the flap and was rigged in such a way that when you straighten your arm, the flap would go up. And I said, well, let me see this wig. And she showed me the wig, and she said, they threw it away at Sweeney Todd because the audience all roared with laughter at the dramatic point in the play, and it didn't work. And I said, well, this is a sketch. We gotta do a scene with these wigs. I said, can you get me 3 or 4 of them? And I'll put,
Was
Buck
this
Henry
Cooper Seeley?
No, this is a woman in New York on the new show.
Oh, the
I
new
forget
show.
her name, and she was the hairdresser. And my God, we came out on that stage at 30 Rock at Studio 8H and shot that thing. It was the same studio as they do Saturday Night Live, and it killed. It just killed. Every time those wigs went up, it killed. I used it again on the Dave Thomas show with Marty and Chevy to be 3 frightened passengers in an airplane. And but it was a prop. Do you know what I mean? A prop that failed that I looked at and thought, well, this is a comedy sketch just waiting to happen.
So funny. And when you just at one point it was the doorbell that would go, and then when the capper though was when you and John just looked at each other, you scared each other just looking at each other's faces.
Yeah.
So you've got a glimpse there, Mike, at what has made me laugh my whole life, which is my big brother. He has a wonderfully mischievous sense of humor that continues to put me away. Chimney Boy.
And sorry, go ahead, Dave.
It was just a stupid idea, Chimney Boy. I love it. When I hear something really stupid like that, that's makes me laugh, you know?
That's great. It's the best. Those are the best laughs.
One more name for you, Dave, and then I promise you'll be free. I'm sorry for taking an extra couple minutes, but Tracy Torme, Mel Torme's son, Tracy Torme, he wrote for SCTV. I'm wondering if you have any. He also passed away around the same time as Brian there.
He did. So I had a weird relationship with Tracy Torme because I was a head writer, and unfortunately, nothing he wrote ever got on. And I remember he got into an argument with me one time in front of the rest of the cast, and I could be nasty if I got into an argument. And I remember the rest of the cast just watching, waiting to see what I was going to say because Tracy was really pissed off at me for not supporting him with one of his sketches. And I didn't say anything. I just kind of went, okay, all right. Everybody's really surprised that I didn't say anything. But I did have to let him go. And so then later on, the cast decided that they needed some new blood. And I'd been head writer for a while, and it was time for me. Rick and I were going to do Strange Brew, so we were leaving anyway. So they decided to bring in a new head writer, and they brought in Don Novello, Father Guido Sarducci, as the head writer for SCTV. Now Tracy's gone; he just left as that transition happened. And I was sitting in the room with Don when he was, and just briefing him on what he would have to do as head writer. And we get a phone call, and it's Mel Torme. And Mel is angry. This is the Velvet Fog calling. Right. And Mel is angry. He says, I got a shotgun in my hand right now, and I want to know who to kill. This is what he says to me. Because he wanted to talk. And I said, hold on a second. I handed the phone to Don, and I said, Don, it's for you. Because he was the new head writer. So
it's for you.
Tracy, as it turned out, was a better sci-fi writer than a comedy writer. And he distinguished himself on Star Trek Next Generation, which had some really brilliant scripts. And he had a great mind. But he just didn't connect at SCTV. And I saw him later. And I guess time heals all wounds. He had sort of forgotten that I'd been the guy to let him go, you know, and he was very friendly and very nice. So we had a nice evening put together by a friend of his, a guy that I wrote with on the Blacklist, Dan Knopf. And it was a real nice evening. And I had a good time with him. And I felt kind of bad that I'd been the one to let him go, but also that it was one of those things where I thought, has he really forgotten that happened? Because nobody ever really forgets if they get fired. Do you know what I mean? And so I didn't really believe he'd forgotten, but he was gracious enough not to bring it up and not to rehash the past. And so kudos to him for that. And I found out from Dan Knopf, because Dan and I became friendly on the Blacklist. And Dan called me, he was crying, and he just said, Tracy died. I said, oh God, I'm so sorry. He had a bunch of health problems in his life, and towards the end especially. So but with the night we went out, we went to hear his brother, who's a singer, kind of a jazz singer like his dad. And he has a sister who's a writer too. And so it was a bunch of us sitting at this table, you know, at a club that does old jazz stuff on top of Mulholland here in LA. And I had a really nice evening with him. And then a couple of phone calls with him later because he was obsessed with UFOs. And he knew that I had written a UFO movie with Dan Aykroyd and knew a little bit about UFOs too. And when those the Chiclet, what are they called? The little UFOs that the U.S. Navy saw and recorded on their cameras. They were like, what's that candy, that breath mint, that little white
Tic Tacs.
Tic Tacs. So they were Tic Tac UFO, and they were really fast and did aerodynamic moves that defied physics and obviously pulled G-forces that a human body would get torn apart. And so the pilots are amazed and they can't believe what they're seeing. And Tracy was obsessed with this. So he had also written, I think, he wrote a UFO movie about a close encounter. I forget, it was a famous one. So he like I said, he was a better sci-fi writer than a comedy writer. But that was my history with him, and I was sorry to hear that he had passed away.
Ian, do you have some new music coming out? Can you let us know we can hear some new?
Yeah, this March I'm coming out in Dolby Atmos. I've done a new album in Dolby Atmos, and it's coming out on Pure Audio Blu-ray in Germany, and Universal is distributing it worldwide for downloads, etc. Although I don't think you can download Atmos properly. There's an Apple version of Spatial, which is sort of okay. And they have a stereo, a binaural version of Atmos that sounds pretty good. So yeah, I'm kind of excited about that. I've always been a studio junkie, and as you can see, I'm a surround sound here. So it's pretty much
Yeah. There you go.
I've gone surround. I really enjoy the tapestry of that, and the atmospherics of it. I've got some solid ideas now that this is my first one, and I worked with an engineer who had mixed a lot of Dolby Atmos, Vic Florencia in Toronto. So, and then of course it got mastered as well, and I had to sit on that. You have to master the Atmos of the audio masters in the Atmos. So it's just master, master, master. So that's new and exciting, and that comes out beginning of March.
Good for you. And Dave, you got any projects you want to promote? What's coming down the pipe?
I am, as they would say, in development, which means no.
You going to buy that SCTV footage from Scorsese and cook that up yourself?
There's a lot better uses of my money than buying that stuff. No, I'm not. No, I got a couple of TV projects in development and a book that I'm trying to finish that I've been working on for a year. And it's my second book. The first book I wrote with another writer, Max Allan Collins. But this one I wrote by myself, and I got 250 pages that I really like. And the last 50 pages is just killing me because I can't crack how I want it to play. And I want it to be good. And I already got an offer from a publisher, but I didn't give it to him because I didn't want to have to do it to meet a deadline if I wasn't happy with it. So,
and you're demo Dave, as I learned. So it's
I might end up just blowing this book up, throwing away the 250 that I've done.
And I know you gentlemen, you think, oh, well, that was 2 hours. That was a long time. But literally from the time I started recording till right now, Dave Thomas literally aged an entire year, because I learned he was born in 48, not 49. So,
well, you can go out and tell everyone that, and they're not going to believe you because it's on IMDb and Wikipedia and everywhere else.
Right.
At one point, the province of Ontario sent me a birth certificate that said I was born in 1958. They did a typo on the birth certificate.
Oh,
That's how swift the province of Ontario can be in issuing birth certificates.
well, that would have required a face pull.
So I kept that too, because I thought this is my ace in the hole. I haven't used it yet.
Well,
he was born 10 years after he was born.
right. Thank you again. Honestly, I loved this Thomas Brothers episode. I loved it so much. And thank you, Ian, for making the time for me. And Dave, thanks for connecting from LA. What a privilege this was for me to host this.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Toronto Mike. And name that tree, would you?
I thought we named it the Toronto Tree.
Yeah, okay. As if you're satisfied with that. I mean, I would accept the fact that you would think about it later and kind of go, I got a better name, Dave. I'm going to go with this instead. Just don't call it something like Steve.
All right, gentlemen, now I need a picture. So I'm going to count you in. Just look as handsome as you can here. Hold on here. We can do this.
Hold on, I'm taking my headphones off.
Yeah. All right. You got to show off that hair so Ian feels bad. Okay. All right. Taking my picture in 3, 2. Okay. Thanks so much. Fudge, man. Anytime you want to talk about anything, I just love it, man. I'm going to drop this in like 10 minutes. This was unbelievable. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Mike.
Pleasure.
All right.
All right.
Peace and love. Bye-bye.
So long.